Good.
Now.
Okay, this is the Littleton City Planning Commission regular meeting for January 12th, 2009. We will have a short regular business meeting and then move into a study session. So I'll call the meeting to order. We're going to put a flag up, or are we going to skip over that one?
There is not a flag.
There is not a flag. We'll pick it up next time.
Okay.
Roll call vote then.
Commissioner Pavlos?
Present.
Commissioner Bockenstedt?
Here.
Commissioner Knufi?
Here.
Knufi, sorry. Can't see. Commissioner Betcalf?
Here.
Commissioner Iteraria?
Here.
Commissioner Kustoff?
Here.
Commissioner Brown?
Present.
And Commissioner
Samuelson.
Samuelson?
Here.
Thank you.
See, that's what you get for sitting all the way down there.
Right, exactly. Thank you.
Okay, first item on the agenda is minutes of the December 8th meeting.
I have a general comment. The comp plan, do we spell that with two P's? Because in this document it's COMPLAN.
Generally, I think it's just one. Yeah, that's my understanding. Yeah.
One, okay.
Mhm.
And then I was wondering on line 26 whether we needed to include the last names of Wendy, Rochelle, and Doreen.
Okay.
And on line 51, I was going to propose to strike out the sentence, he encouraged BIAC to look at things, at the things accomplished, and the next sentence would read, he said the city is not closed for business, and discussed current developments. And then on line 55, I'll give you my notes. On 55, instead of reviewing the notes, but the minutes on the BIAC website.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other corrections or additions?
Yes, on line 12 and line 31, my name is misspelled. I know I have a very ordinary and plain name, and most people try to add more words to it, but there is no R after the T.
Okay, thank you.
On line 62, my name is spelled correctly. By the way, I also noticed that the misspelling of making my name with 13 instead of 12 is also on the website, and since I imagine we will
really?
be doing
Okay.
some updates on it at that point, maybe easy enough to correct.
1 out of 3 is not bad.
I like making it more interesting.
Okay, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes as corrected?
I move that we approve the minutes as corrected.
Second.
Second from Norm Brown. We're not wired.
They're not wired.
I'm not.
No juice.
That's what the solder was about.
There we go. Okay, good. Okay.
I'm sorry. Is that a surprise to anyone?
Doing fine.
Okay, minutes were approved as amended by a vote of 7-0. 6.
I wasn't here.
You weren't here. 6-0. Okay, next item of business is election of officers. Recognizing this is short-term until the new council appointments take effect April 1st, presumably?
That's correct. We have some conflicting language between the citywide handbook for boards and commissions and what are the rules of procedure for planning commission. Rules of procedure for planning commission says that the planning commission shall elect new officers immediately upon the vacation of one office, and so that's what we will go with at this point. And the handbook actually talks about the annual election, which we will go with in April as well, so be able to do both, I think. And nominations are from the floor, and they are from regular members at this point, four regular members, for voting members.
Actually, my understanding is City Council has appointed Linda Newfinke, as a permanent member, regular member, rather than an alternate. So,
My understanding too.
By some action?
Yeah, was there a vote on it? We're a little confused. There was a
Yes.
vote? Okay, great.
Yes.
Good,
so we have a full vote.
good.
Or board, or commission.
Great. Super.
Okay, so I guess we're open for nominations from the floor.
I'd like to nominate David Metcalf for the chair.
I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Other nominations?
There is no other.
There's no other nomination. Okay, you ready for the question?
What a question.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Nominations for Chair Pro Tem to chair the meetings in the absence of the chairman, also, as I understand, to serve as the rules and, right,
That's correct.
keep us on track.
Julio, we still have yours on. Your
still
light
on.
is on for some reason.
You're still on.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Nominations from the floor. Or volunteers.
I'll nominate Kevin if he doesn't object.
I object. I'd like to nominate Julio.
I object.
Now I know why it was so easy for me to get elected. That and the fact that it's only temporary, so.
I'll try again. Steve, I don't have any idea, but I'll nominate you unless you decline. I'll do it.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor? We have officers.
Okay.
I don't see a big audience out there. I suspect we don't have any unscheduled public appearances.
Right.
Dennis, no public hearings.
The public hearings, we may have one in February. But, yeah.
You say we may. Any,
We may.
general,
Just depending on the application process itself and if they get material back in, if we have DRC, you have schedule and time, that type of thing, so.
but we don't have time for any input from the outside, you know.
Yep.
Are you saying we're closed for business?
No, that's not what he's saying.
I'll let you say that. I ain't saying.
Not on the air, anyway. Okay, long-range planning, the comp plan update, we're going to pick up again with a study session immediately following this meeting. So that takes us down to reports. Start with staff.
Staff report, just remind everybody that if you are a 2009 term, that you, and if you're interested in running again, so please submit your application by the 30th of this month. So appreciate that. Okay.
And who do we have as those? We might as well put them on the record.
The three that are, is my understanding is Linda Newfinke, Steve Bockenstedt, and Kurt Samuelson are the three. So.
Okay. Liaison reports, BIAC.
I don't have a formal report today, but I do want to mention that Suzanne facilitated a brainstorming session with the BIAC at the last meeting on December 19th, and what we discussed kind of paralleled what we're doing in the comp plan process, talking about like housing and business and industry, the downtown area. So they have requested that we meet with them at a later date. And I think at the next BIAC meeting, that'll shake out a little bit, and we can put some timeframes around that, so. And that's all I have.
Did they have any specific things they wanted to talk about, or just general progress toward the comp plan update?
General progress towards the comp plan, well, it wasn't necessarily progress towards the comp plan update, but kind of discussion of how BIAC fits in with what the Planning Commission is doing, and kind of almost wanting to help us in doing what we need to do. Did you get that impression, Suzanne, too? Yeah. More or less.
I was kind of busy facilitating, so I wasn't paying attention to our future meetings, so.
No, it's a pair.
Oh, here, wait, those two.
Yep. Okay. Historic Preservation Board?
Yeah, at the last meeting, they had a state tax credit application for the Palm Theater. They had a resolution for two outgoing members, Amy Reed, who had resigned, and Ellie Pope, who had moved out of the city. They've got the forums coming on up for their historic preservation forums, February 12th and February 26th. That's, once again, I want to encourage everybody to go to. Sounds like it's going to be real good information out of there.
So it would be 7 p.m., I believe, Steve, in the Buck Center. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
We have an additional copy. Kurt.
We short one?
No.
No.
Okay, if you pass another one now.
Okay, commissioners' comments or questions? Norm, you want to start?
I've got an article I copied. It's about Greenwood Village and a project that was denied there. You can reference it in the Villager. I think it's the December 25th, 2008 Villager, and it's titled Mixed Feelings Over Denial of Mixed Use Project. I've got copies for the commissioners. It's, I think, of note the struggles other cities are having regarding high-density property use. This gets into some eminent domain issues also, so might be worth looking through. Here's copies for everyone, including the alternate.
You know, we're saving paper. We only have 8 members now instead of 9.
If I refer to it, at least I can hand it to you, and then you can decide to recycle it at your convenience. That's all I have.
Okay. You say this is online too?
I imagine it is.
Okay. Mr. Kostoff.
No comment.
Mr. Eteria. One syllable too many. Stavlos is one consonant too many.
Actually, I have a number of items I really wanted to talk about, but I think I'm going to wait until the study session. It'd be most appropriate.
Okay.
None?
Steve?
Yeah, I'd like to bring up the idea at the next meeting on having a resolution ready for Kent's service.
Good. The idea has also been expressed, we may think about doing that at the joint meeting with City Council, if that makes sense to the Planning Commission, and have the mayor present that, if that would be, sounds like a good idea.
Marcos?
No report at this time.
Kurt? Nothing. Okay, as chair, the only thing I was going to ask was, I know we talked last week about trying to get these study sessions back to the community room. Because of the current situation with the broadcasting, that's just not possible, right?
Well, actually, Doreen did some more exploration, and I talked to Kelly, and it is possible, so I think we can move. We didn't think we could move tonight because there was supposed to be a police meeting in the building, in the community room, but we certainly could move the next meeting if you so desire.
Good. That'll make everybody happy.
Can, if there's an opportunity to be in the other room, can we first use that as a clearinghouse before we go back in here?
Yes.
Just as an assumption.
Absolutely.
Then the other question I had was, in the past, of course, the last few months we've been lucky. We haven't had a whole lot of applications or hearings. But typically we get those on a Friday, all the documentation. That puts a lot of pressure on everybody to do this stuff over the weekend to be ready. Is there any way of expediting that? getting a few days ahead of time?
The information I put together, certainly for the study sessions, I could get out earlier. The information that comes out for public hearings is a little bit more set in terms of schedules to when it comes out, but typically those are mailed on Wednesday, I believe, so you should be getting them on Thursday at least.
Do we normally get those Thursdays?
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I had. Do I hear a motion to adjourn and reconvene as a study session?
So move.
Second?
And
Steve seconded. All those in favor? And we are adjourned from the regular meeting. So Dennis, are we going to try and do this over again?
We are. I'm going to try and do this so that folks at home can see it as well. First thing we were going to do was the reports from the different subcommittees. As you remember, we had 5 different subcommittees last time that people went out and did work on their own, and really appreciate that. Historic Preservation, Norm and Steve is up first, I think, and then we're going to talk about plan alternatives that Kurt and Kevin worked on. Dave worked on the glossary, and we had 2 different subcommittees working on the public outreach strategy. Both Julio and Pablos worked on it, and Linda and Steve worked on it.
Linda and Norm.
Norm.
Actually, I was going to make a note. Yeah, I was working with Linda on stakeholders and survey process under item D there.
Okay, that's one. Thank you. Okay. So overview of the process was Julio and Pablos, and stakeholders and survey was Linda and Norm. Right? Okay. So I think we start off with historic preservation, Norm and Steve. And I did send out language in your packets that the subcommittee put together at a meeting that they had with representatives from the Historic Preservation Board last week.
I had some notes from our meeting with members of the Historic Preservation Board. If it's agreeable to Steve and with Dennis, I'll run through those briefly. And then I think Dennis has an item, a copy of an item to hand out. The 3 of us, Dennis, Steve, and me, met with 2 of the Historic Preservation Board members, William Hopping, the chairman, and Kevin Koenig, one of the board members, on January 8th, and we were discussing including in the Central Area Comp Plan a section regarding historic preservation. The Planning Commission had discussed this earlier, and at that time Dennis had a handout similar to what you see on the screen and have copies of that he gave to, handed out to everyone there, and we discussed that. I also had brought in a couple things. I had an example from Lincoln, Nebraska, similar in style to the 2030 plan document that we use as reference, and it involved historic preservation in Lincoln, Nebraska. Then I had one in the style from High Springs, Florida, that is very much like our existing comp plan that we're updating in that it's broken into policies and goals, and that's what has been handed out. Dennis was kind enough to make copies. About halfway down the first page is where we get into it. I think we've then subsequently Dennis sent out a revised version of that included the additions and suggestions from the Preservation Board. My notes from that meeting, I think there were a couple comments. Let's see if I can find them here. There was concerns from the board members, the Historic Preservation Board members, that we need to streamline the process. Their example was Ruth Graham's approval to do modifications to her business, and that they also both suggested that we schedule and interact more between the Planning Commission and the Historic Preservation Board. I think we settled on a time frame of every 2 years. We should probably have a joint meeting to discuss issues and maybe upcoming conflicts, how to address items between the two boards and commissions. So I think that's basically been included. They brought to our attention their vision statement and the header. I think it's up at the top of the screen there, but near as I could tell, yes, under goal, Dennis reworded it a little bit, but that incorporates most of the elements from their vision statement. Hopefully that would be agreeable to them, and I think it's well said. I think that's about the size of it as far as our meeting with them. I had a couple suggestions, which is why I had asked Dennis to hand out the copies from High Springs, Florida. They had a couple policies that I thought might be good, and I'd like the planning commissioners to consider two things. One of them, I'm on the wrong page again. The first one is policy 1.12, which continues from the first page to the second page, basically. Their policy reads, the city will require new construction to be in harmony with historic buildings in the vicinity as to material, scale, height, placement, and use. I would like to have this commission consider wording in the comp plan that is similar but uses, instead of the word require, that the city will encourage new construction to be in harmony, and therefore give developers or residents some idea of the direction we'd like to see buildings in the historic district and the historic downtown area go as far as facade and materials and things like that. The next item I'd like the board to continue or to consider continues next, policy 1.13 from this document. The city will provide sufficient administrative staff with adequate training to assist owners in the historic district in applying for and securing appropriate permits and to assure compliance with historic preservation ordinances. And the city currently has a staff person, and there's certainly several competent people associated with the historical museum, very knowledgeable as to the surveys that have been done in the city and the buildings and the history, provenance of the districts and so on. And so I would recommend that for the consideration of the Planning Commission also. And those were the two things that I drew on for the public. I guess this document is much more detailed, but just from reading through it, High Springs, Florida, and this is available on the internet, seems to be very similar in nature to our downtown. And they talk about parking and some, they have a historic preservation advisory committee, and I think it might be fun to visit sometime just to see how much like downtown Littleton it looks, because from their comp plan it looks like they have a lot of the same issues and probably a similar city. That's the extent of what I have.
Just out of curiosity, Norm, do you know how big that town is?
I don't. I sorted through historic preservation references in several comp plans and picked out two and never went back to really, I'm much more familiar with Lincoln, Nebraska, I guess, than I am High Springs, Florida. I'd never heard of it before. But as I say, I got this from online, so I'm sure it could be, you could do all kinds of research.
Steve, did you have additional comments?
Okay. Plan alternatives, Kurt and Kevin?
Do you want to vote on adding those? Do you want to go ahead and make that decision at this point, or do you want to put that off till the next discussion? And what I can do is include those and send those out with the next draft.
That would be my suggestion.
See what we collect tonight.
Yeah, and perhaps there's something else in this document that might be useful. I didn't want to load us down with too much, but had a copy for everyone, so everyone could at least read those two and consider it.
I guess my only comment about the first policy is that generally I don't have an issue with it whatsoever. However, what came into my mind as I was thinking about this, we really need to address where the historical area is and how much of the central area that we're really talking about versus the entire, and I guess that's what I want to discuss at a later time about that one policy.
So that's the first one that Norm was suggesting, rather than the first one that's on the existing. Okay, good.
Yeah, and for that matter, I'd be curious just to see what our Historic Preservation Board would have to say on that as far as defining terms and what's historic, what's just old in one area or another. So a lot of things to think about.
It's entirely reasonable that we would reference buildings that are included in the historic district, one of the two now, perhaps. And we're talking about the central area now, but a lot of what I'm thinking about is, I guess, broad enough to be applicable to the next neighborhood, or in the case of stakeholders, which is the other subcommittee I'm on, to use the working template throughout the rest of the city. So there's the historic district east of here also that we might want to include something about historic preservation in the neighborhood plan there. And this is, of course, this is draft, and these suggestions are to take to the public.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with anything. I just was thinking that,
Do we already have a listing of all the historically designated and list of merit buildings in the central area?
We do, yes. Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't know if I've handed it out or not. I thought I had, but perhaps I don't. I have, Steve.
Okay.
Dennis, is that one of the background documents that's in the downtown design standards and guidelines? There's a whole set of information there as far as characteristics of the downtown central area.
It might be. I'm not sure how current it is, because it has, it is updated periodically. Good question. You want to move on to the second subcommittee?
Yeah. Kevin seems to have deferred to you, Kurt.
I have seemed to run off and left my notes on my desk. So
Kurt and I went a little overboard, I think, because we weren't clear about what our homework assignment was. That's what I get for ditching early. Happened often in Littleton Public Schools, too, as a side note. But Dennis, and we emailed it to you. Is there any chance you have it on there that you can bring it up
here.
at least?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we didn't make copies either.
Okay. I do.
I did not realize that we were supposed to make copies. We actually took land use and created a draft land use vision statement to begin with, and then we went through and talked about policies and current environment that is occurring. If you guys can read it that fast, you're better than I am.
It's a big overview, sorry.
So, I don't know.
They show the extent of their work here. They did quite a bit. You want to start with the goal, perhaps, and just the vision statement itself?
I don't know how we're going to be able to work with this, because I do apologize. I did not know we were supposed to bring copies.
That's all right. I'm sorry. I didn't make copies either. I should have. Okay, those elements of the central area's built environment that are, wrong one. I went too far.
We changed it. We went a little nuts.
Okay. That's good. Downtown Littleton land use policies will encourage and enable a balance and diversity in the projected land uses while respecting the importance of a clean and healthy environment and its historic nature. So we're looking for a vision statement. I think one of the things that we'd want to take to, certainly to a public meeting and to City Council, if we can, would be a draft vision statement for the central area itself. And so I think if we can start flushing something out, I think that'd be very helpful. I've actually I've gone through all the work that Kurt and Kevin did, and taken a little different aspect in terms of how we might deal with it. One of the things I was thinking you might want to consider would be taking different alternatives to a public meeting, kind of extreme alternatives. And I think they've built in the kind of concerns here that would be dealing with those things.
Well, we talked about the extreme alternatives idea, concept behind it, and please jump in here, Kurt, if I'm overstepping. But our thoughts were that, quite honestly, unless somebody buys up a large parcel of downtown Littleton in the downtown neighborhood, there really is not going to be any extreme.
Okay. Let me show you what I was thinking about and see if I'm on the right track or if you guys want to do something else. But I took the issues that Kevin and Kurt raised, such as land use mix, and did kind of different alternatives. And it kind of goes from sort of an extreme to another. Alternative 1, 2, and 3. And 2, the green one, is kind of the mix of the yellow and the blue. With the land use mix, for example, you might have all uses allowed, whereas opposed to alternative 3, a more conservative approach, you have single use only. So it's either residential or commercial. It's industrial, it's retail, it's something that's more single use. Whereas alternative, kind of the one in the mix, may be a combination of single use and mixed use projects. So you might have some buildings that are single use, others are actually mixed use buildings. And I think if you were to go that way, if you propose that to the public, you probably end up with something which would not be a clear 1, 2, or 3. It'd be a mix of all these things. But sometimes it's a valuable tool for at least having that kind of discussion in terms of potential impacts. Under land use retail, for example, if 3 might be only convenience retail, whereas number 1 might be only destination retail, and 2 could be a combination of the two. Land use versus form. 3 might be land use based review, and 1 might be a form-based review, and then 2 would be an alternative, which would be a combination of land use and form-based review of projects. Density, very high density on the yellow, very low density, and something more like a pedestrian scale density is kind of a compromise, I think, of the two. Circulation, pedestrian, and bicycle orientation for yellow, blue being more automobile orientation, and the green being all modes are accommodated, so you do both, or you do all those modes. And I don't know if this is helpful or not in terms of thinking about, what the options are for downtown. Circulation, wide detached sidewalks only, as opposed to narrow attached sidewalks or no sidewalks. A combination of wide attached and detached sidewalks is a kind of combination of the two. Parking, either shared parking or single-use parking. Parking centrally located or attached to each use. And again, I think parking is going to be something we're going to be looking at fairly closely. The yellow parking, again, looking at the requirements, no off-street parking required, as opposed to in the blue, regulations require substantial off-street parking. Green regulations reflect use and availability of shared parking. There's no great consistency between yellow and blue in terms of whether it's a consistent base, but there are at least extremes, I think. Design review, in the yellow perhaps being comprehensive design review as opposed to no design review. Streets being narrow streets and restrict traffic, wide streets accommodating traffic, a combination in the green. Streetscape, either continuous streetscapes, so you don't have breaks with parking lots or vacant sites, abandoned sites, or the blue being storefronts separated by parking, and it may be appropriate in some areas, but in other areas it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Housing required in every project, no housing or only low cost or high cost housing provided in the blue, whereas the green might be a mix of housing types and prices. Historic preservation, in the yellow all structures are protected, blue no structures are protected. Parks and open space are distributed throughout the downtown, and in the blue, no parks or open space or easy connections to parks or open space, whereas the green would be parks and open space are nearby and readily accessible. Gateways, again, we start getting even to probably less significant things. Gateways clearly mark entries and edges, and no gateways are sense of entry or boundaries, whereas the green is gateways at key entries and edges, and signs either very restrictive or few sign relations. So I don't know if that kind of discussion, but again, those are the ideas that Kurt and Kevin were bringing up, and I might run out real quick while you guys have a discussion and make copies, because that might be helpful for you to have the copies of these things.
I would like to hear also what Kevin and Kurt came up through their discussion.
Good.
I've got a feeling of where you created your matrix, but I really want to hear their overall thought process at this point in time, so I can get a better understanding as well.
Good.
Because when they said they went over the top, I really want to hear what that's all about.
I think we listed everything that we possibly could think of going through those, but I'm not sure that we totally understood what Dennis was asking us to do in those alternatives, to come up with those 3 different alternatives for each one of those different items. And my question maybe towards Dennis or to anyone is, how do we take that to the public? How are they going to be able to look through each one of those 27 different items and the 3 different alternatives of each and give us true good feedback on that?
So you weren't trying to coordinate with the goals and policies we've already started, in draft form? You were just clearing the boards and starting to think freely about...
I wouldn't say we were clearing the boards. I mean, I think everything that we talked about so far is, what we did is we created this vision statement and then just kind of brain dumped on, what's going on. And everything we've talked about was on there, from pedestrian and bicycle friendly to industrial zoning and everything else being, the industrial zoning came up plenty of times, and how to basically move Littleton forward, or I don't know, I would say the word forward is correct, but move Littleton in a different direction from our industrial zoning areas, where we have industrial next to R5 right now, and ease that transition and work toward that. It really was just a brain dump, and everything that was already brought up is in there. We're talking about environmental uses, we're talking about and hopefully when you guys see it, it'll be easier to understand. And instead of doing the alternatives, because like I said, I don't know necessarily that there are a lot of, even if we want to recreate downtown Littleton and just bulldoze and start over, it ain't going to happen unless somebody buys it, the whole thing, and that is fairly unlikely, I think, during our terms. Unless you guys know something I don't. So the concept is that easing those current zoning riffs, I guess. Kurt, I know I'm tap dancing here, man. I'm dying.
Well, I think when Dennis brings this back, we'll have a better idea. You guys can see what we put down for those alternatives, but it wasn't specific as wide as Dennis's. You have this extreme or this extreme. I don't think we can get to either one of those with the way we have zoning downtown. We talked more about changing that industrial zoning, bringing things more in line, but I don't know that we had the extremes that he had. But again, just pretty much going through everything, many of the things that we've already discussed, but putting them all out there to look at in one land use for the central area.
So starting with the brain dump, you'd expect to go through and say, some of these aren't really a choice. Nobody's really going to choose between one or the other. We can narrow it down to the ones that are practical choices that somebody could seriously consider for a part of or all of downtown.
Right.
That's probably a good filter.
And what we wanted is for people just to see all of the thing. The concept is that we have everything on the table for discussion, so that the public could look at it and go, oh yeah, I've been wanting to talk about the bicycle piece for a while. But we also talked about the different players that were involved too. For instance, we talked about the obvious ones, the ACC, the EchoStars, the major employers in the downtown area. But then we also talked about Littleton schools and South Suburban, and because while they aren't necessarily located downtown, they have a major effect on the area, and how coordinating with them and their efforts is important. So I think the concept is hopefully somebody would read that and say, well, at least they're considering that.
And I like the idea of what you're thinking about is putting everything out, for the public to kind of agree upon. And one of the things that, I've been thinking about is how to get that information out, how to get people to comment on it, and try to get a good response. And I think one of the things that you're referring to is possibly, and I'm just throwing out ideas, but to put some of this stuff that you have even here maybe on some boards and have people, you give people, like X amount of people, 5 or 10 just circular dots, and they go to the interesting ones that they have, and if you have 100 or even 50 or 25 people, it doesn't make any difference. But you give them a certain amount of dots, and they go to that particular interest that they have and follow through, and then you create a prioritization based upon literally the number of dots next to those individual elements. So stating that, you're really kind of going through a prioritization that you've created with your what you classify as your general brainstorm.
Dennis, could you stop? Number 2 is a perfect example of what we're talking about, the brain dump. Parking regulations are often inconsistent and incompatible with development and redevelopment requests. These should be better integrated in both land use planning and review of new development. We talked about that. The example when that was brain dumping to me was Merle's. I mean, none of it, the parking was our current parking regulations it's a mess. I mean, Norm is our expert on that locally. But it's inconsistent, it's not setting good pattern, but let's see if that's truly what our downtown constituency is concerned about. I'm betting it is, but...
So you're not really talking about coming up with 2 or 3 or 4 overall scenarios for them to evaluate or give us feedback on, but a range of alternatives within each of those elements that then they can essentially create their own kit of parts to say, this is how we think it ought to go together in our vision of it?
I believe Kurt is...
How many are there on there, like 28 to 30?
Oh, yeah.
Different issues that I think and maybe some of them could be consolidated somewhat, but if there was an opportunity for people, like Julio said, to let their interest be known, I think that's a great way to get it out to the public, and perhaps in conjunction with the way Dennis has it split out from extreme alternatives.
Well, I like this a lot. I think this might work better than the other, just because
I think this is very strong, and I like it because of the fact that it appears that you've hit, without reading the whole thing, just from your discussion. The concept was to try to create all the hot points, if you could, for the given subject, and I think it appears that you're, and I'm not in position to say which one's higher than another, and that's exactly what I want to see, is go to the public with something, let them ponder it, and this is also in line with what I'm going to talk about when Pablos and I have an opportunity to speak about the outreach program, because that's where a lot of this, I think, will kind of bring a lot of your thoughts and everybody else's thoughts.
That's where we'll really flesh everything out
together. Yeah, in a kind of a overall perspective of where we need to go and how we try to get there.
Would the two of you see this as taking more effort to try and, let's see, how do I want to put this? Make each of these a little more specific about how they would be reflected in reality, and would we need to go into some concept of consequences or interactivity between them, so somebody doesn't pick something from column A that's totally at odds with something from column B? I mean, is that part of the process, or we just throw it out there and let them go through the thought process and come back to us?
We have the final determination of what we think is appropriate. I mean, that's the whole idea of what we're trying to do. But we don't want to, at this point in time, throw something out that may be important that we don't know anything about. I would much rather say, and I hate to be this fundamental, but, that this is the priority system we went through, and based on this priority system, we had to make a process of elimination of those elements or statements or whatever they are, and figure out where we're going. And I think that's appropriate. I think that's exactly the type of freedom from the citizens we want to hear back of where their interests lie. Because without it, I don't want to mandate to anybody, what we want to see, because we're only what percentage? We're a very small percentage of the entire city, and yet we're trying to represent the entire city at the same time. So we need to hear it from them.
I was going to suggest the exercise that Julio was talking about sounds to me like it would be good in the form of a planning academy, and we talked about that, where you have some people and you say, here, let's go through this, prioritize, and then we discuss, well, here's how we went about it. The other comment I had was just as you scrolled through them, the green shaded areas in the center seem to me, at least in the central area here, to be what is currently in place or how things are being developed currently. You've got both a new project and a very old, not very old, a fairly old house right up here on Prince Street that are live here, work here projects. So you've got mixed use that is in place, has been for quite a while, and a fairly recent one, I think maybe 3 years old. And that definitely is one of those green categories that falls in the center range someplace. So,
by the way, number 7 on the page, lack of education opportunities for land use issues. If I may, I'll just start. The vision that we started off with, downtown Littleton land use policies will encourage and enable a balance and diversity in the projected land uses while respecting the importance of clean and healthy environment and its historic nature. I tried to keep it pretty simple, pretty without excluding anyone, keep it pretty generic, quite honestly. And then I went through current regulations and policies, development patterns and designs currently. Tried to talk about environment, area uses, process coordination, and then starting on the third page, the downtown neighborhood land use policies, I just went brain dump. I mean, you can see it goes all the way to the double E something or double H. So I tried to hit everything that we've ever brought up, but I'm sure I missed something.
No, you got every one of them.
And then Kurt and we collaborated and tried to make sure that we didn't miss anything. Thank you for making those copies.
Yeah, thank you.
You're all that in a bag of chips. I'm thinking Doritos. That may be just because I'm hungry, but the idea is exactly what Dave said, that, and Julio, he hit it on the nail on the head, is that hopefully that we can present the vision and here's all the things that we think are behind it. You tell us what's important.
What's important, yeah, I agree. I think that this is, part of me thinks that I think that, what we come up with tonight because of, well, when we get to the next part, when we start talking about the outreach program and all that stuff, it's going to be somewhat critical. And when I say we come up with something, it's going to have to be things that are belonging in the primary area as well as the secondary area, and trying to figure that out as people are going through, and as a caveat to basically what you've already come up with, you and Kurt. I think it's just going to be, we have to allow the folks to kind of see the difference of our map, what we've come up with as far as that primary and secondary area that we've kind of agreed that's fundamentally our interest area, and then going from there and see if we can make it all, how we can make it all work. And I think whatever we go out with to the citizens is going to be a little bit more on the, it's not going to be a final report. It's not even going to be close to a final report. It's a rough report, and yet it's we're trying to entice people, to get people thinking about what they may or may not have already been thinking of. And if it stimulates them, I think that's what the preference is. Whatever it takes to stimulate the people of Littleton to come out and really take charge of this and look at it and tell us either we're on the right path or, we're just full of hooey, which is fine too. I mean, with all due respect to everybody, I think it's, for the folks that are out there, we're doing the best we can with what we got to get something out in a timely fashion, and so we can get it moving, so we can get people, so people can react. And I think that's what we have to do, is try to figure out how we're going to get them to react and all that kind of stuff. So I think this is all good. I mean, I don't see anything. I mean, the only time that I think that I would love to see from both you guys, like on the first one, between regulation and policies, I like to know what the differences are in your minds when you relate to those. Because if I was to put an R next to 1 through 9 or a P next to it, I'd like to know which ones you were thinking about as you were going down the road. And then when you go to on your A through double E or whatever that is, where you start talking about policies, some of those might even be R's for all I know.
Honestly, I think the word policies probably shouldn't be there. It's more regulations is what I was trying to think of the current environment, current, and the policies, the word policies gets, in my opinion, confused with the current stuff. That could be stricken. It's more, I'm trying to think of the current environment, what's currently existing, what I hear from current folks, how our zoning is, processes are restrictive or not, how are they restrictive? I think that was Dennis' comment, is how. But yeah, the policies word I think is, and I would tell you there's probably not that much difference between one and the other, so yeah, adding them, putting them all together wouldn't.
Well, and I think it's just important because, I mean, when I think of policies to me are the non-regulatory. They're they're still at the ideas of things, and whereas we get into regulations is where we're trying to implement whatever those policies are, and that's kind of the differentiation that I see, or I bring to the table when I think about that. It's certainly up for grabs of how you all think about it, but at least you need to know where I'm coming from when I look at those terms.
I guess my question is, how do we see this brainstorming list matching up with what we've been doing so far on trying to generate goals and policies for the central area? Are we looking at this as an alternative to what we've drafted so far, and elaboration on it?
That's what I understood our homework, and like I said, I left early, so I thought we were to come up with an alternative. So
this is just something to stimulate the conversations, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it piggybacks to exactly the central area land use as well, in my opinion, because again, you have different points of view. You have two alternatives literally in front of us. The one that we had originally created, and then this one, I think, which is equal. And then, now the question is, how does it all kind of pan out? And what rises to the surface after everything is kind of digested by a lot of other folks? And I think that's what I'm looking for. And somewhere along the line, if we have to cut something out, we'll know why we're cutting it out. I mean, it's not like we're trying to be just arbitrary when we do it, but we're trying to give some reasoning to our thought process so it's defensible to anybody and everybody who might have an issue with what we've done.
A lot of these, I guess, when I read through them, it looks to me like they're issues. And did you want to add value statements to these, or, for example, zoning processes are restrictive? We want them to react. Is that whether that's good or bad, or
I intentionally kept my own opinions, and the opinion it was the whole idea was just these are things that we've talked about. These are issues that have come up. This is stuff that we've all taught. I think everything on here is something that's been said in one of our meetings at some point in time.
I guess my concern is how we put this in a form that's presentable to the public, so that they can they identify. If we're saying there are say 4 clear ways of looking at public parking in the downtown area, how do we explicitly define those so they know what it is, what the alternatives are?
I wasn't even trying to go there yet. I'm still at is parking an issue?
Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. I think that I think the fact that you guys brought up the issue of parking in and of itself, I think the feedback you're going to get is going to be everything from, is it an issue, to, yeah, here's an issue and it needs to be dealt with in this manner. And I think we need to, that's exactly the kind of flexibility. I just don't, I'm not looking for the type of summary report of this to go out that's going to be as logical or as, and I don't mean that this isn't, but I mean, like a chapter or whatever to the next. I'm not worried about that kind of order. I guess what I'm looking at is to get something out there that people can respond to. Either they like it or they not. This is certainly not the final document by any stretch of the imagination, and that's the first thing that I'd probably like on this one here where it says in very light letters, it says draft. Well, I like to have that on virtually anything and everything we're going to send out as is to the public we're going to look for reactions from. The concept is that we're focusing here on the central area. We're expecting, and that's another question we have to talk about. Who do we give this all to? Do we just give it to the folks in the central area, or do we expand it to the entire city? That's another community type of question that we all have to ask ourselves and come up with some kind of an answer.
Dave, more to your point, for instance, number 5 on that first page talks about workforce housing, and I mean, those are all really key buzzwords right now. But if the folks in downtown Littleton aren't concerned about workforce housing, that's not where I want to take this.
So,
and while while they're buzzwords and these are hot things to have in comp plans and all these things, if that's not what they're concerned about, then back to Julio's concept about the dots. There's no dots on here. I'm not going with it.
So if I'm understanding correctly, then the thought is to use these for issue identification, see if we can capture the right issues. So we should be writing these so that they are an issue rather than a goal, so that we really say, here's something that's existing, like you've done. Is this of concern to you or not? So
this is just a prioritization. We're not really looking for analysis or a consistent feedback or somebody's consistent vision. It's just, look through this list and tell us the ones that really get a gut reaction from you, so we know that we either need to take it up and maybe you can give us some direction, or nobody cares, so why are we wasting our time on it?
Well, and I think, and I agree with that. But I think what also needs to be a part of that is what we have here in the central area land use with some of these goals and policies, remembering that these two guys went off on an alternative to that, and this is their reaction, which I think is highly relevant to what's out here. This is the mainstay, if you will, just like, and this is their interpretation of that, which I'm in total agreement with. I'm waiting for the next interpretation of both of these.
How do we elicit the responses from the public? Unless we throw some issues or
I would think that
if
we handed this out to 25 citizens would have something in here that they would get spun out about, or something that they would say that they really approve in.
I'm kind of in favor of just giving them global topics like your circulation, your economic development, historical preservation, and people tell us what is important underneath each one of those topics, and then at the end of the session we can go ahead and set priorities and find out what everybody in the public hearings, what is of interest to them. So you're presenting a definition of each of the topics, but you're letting them fill in the blanks. And therefore, then we wouldn't there would not be any judgment, if you will. We wouldn't be setting any kind of biases up front.
What's everybody else think of that? That's very different, I think, from where Kevin and Kurt were going in terms of trying to outline all the things we've talked about, all the things we've heard. So.
I don't know if it's all that different. I really actually kind of think it is kind of right on with what we're talking about. I mean, the whole idea was just to brain dump everything that we've talked about with regards to this land use stuff. And like I said, I misunderstood. I thought when you asked for alternatives, you were looking for, and not totally different than what we currently had. And, I mean, I created some, I tried to keep my opinion out of it. I tried to keep my thoughts out of it, and just,
So it's an alternative, not in terms of a format for a comprehensive plan.
No,
It's
I'm
an
not-
alternative in how to go out to the community to get feedback.
right, I'm not looking for, if this is published, Dennis, you need to find another job. No, this is, it was just quick and easy. Here's a vision of where we're coming from, and then blah.
I look at it as a starter. Excuse me, Julio. Let me just jump in.
Sure.
This small area plan is what we've come up with. And then the subgroup came up with these alternatives. And I think, referring back to what Steve said, if you give the small area plan to 25 people and also give them these alternatives, you say, so which of these would you put in there, or what else do you have? But this gives them something to look at, and if they have some particular hot button issue and it's not in here, then they'll say, and I'd like to see a policy in the central area, the small area plan for the central area, that the city will build a great big fountain, maybe somebody has some issue, and it's not in the alternative.
Heliport down here.
Yeah, a heliport on top of some tall building.
We'll get those in any case,
Yeah.
whether we invite them or not.
Yeah. So, but you give them a starter based on what the subgroup came up with, and you give them what we have put together, as Julio says, doing the best we can, and, take it someplace. Take it to Tom Christopite's pub meeting in a month, something like that, and just hand it to people and say, now, please get back to us. And if they don't, they don't.
I would think if we brought our draft and handed it out to a lot of people, they would sit there and they would read it, and it wouldn't promote the conversation that this would. Our draft, they would probably agree with some things, not agree with some things, but the chances of them commenting that they didn't agree with something on the draft would be a lot less than if they read this.
I'm not sure I'm bothered as much by the idea of setting aside everything we've been progressing on for the last several meetings as I am the idea, and this is a fairly large list, and I assume you guys are anticipating boiling it down a little bit to something that's a little more approachable. I guess I'd want to ensure that we're providing items that they can respond to, that aren't so generalized that they can't see. What kinds of things are you envisioning as alternatives? Physically, what's it going to look like? Not just tell me that higher density, what's that mean to most people? Or friendly environment. General terms like that are not going to promote anything we can deal with, nothing concrete. But you give them alternatives, what it might look like if, and then you can start getting some feedback that we can work with. I guess the other thing I'm a little concerned about is if we're going to do this randomly out with the pub for meeting and some other things, we're talking anecdotal collection of data, nothing that we can really use as a foundation for preparing a proposed comp plan to the city council and the community. So I'm wondering how we make the transition. I see where you're going with the idea of getting these issues out there, but I think we need to do a little more work on coming up with something concrete.
Hold on. I think what I want to do, though, I think we've gone far enough on this particular item because of the fact that we still have a glossary, we still have an outreach. All of us have tried as a subgroup to try to come up with something. I think the entire planning commission needs to hear it all before we draw any conclusions. I think it's premature that, I like what Kevin and Kurt did. I'm going to let it stand at that. Okay. I think we need to go to the glossary section because when we get to the outreaches, I'm hoping with a lot of the stuff that we've been thinking about, Pablos and I we might be able to bring a lot of this stuff to some closure.
Yeah, I guess what I'd like to see as we go through each of these is whichever teams are working on it, say, okay, here's what we've got so far. Here's where we think, what the direction we're taking, where we think we need to go next to bring this to something that's a usable tool. That's all I'm looking for, just a general statement.
But I guess my comment is, like, we all did something. There's no right or wrong to any of this. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is, we could sit there and belabor the point on this for a long time, whereas I really think we need to kind of go through what the subcommittee reports are all about.
See how it all comes together.
Discussion.
I agree. I think it's a great idea. Go through, then come back around.
I would also add that a lot of the discussion around this ended up being discussion on outreach, and so,
No, there's no good segue.
I mean, which is important, but it was not really, I think, what
Because of that,
either
would you
Kurt or
go on
Kevin
down,
were asked
come
to
back
do.
to glossary, would that be?
I'm all for glossary. I don't care what
Okay.
order you go through. It doesn't make any difference.
Okay, well, let's do glossary, and then we'll go on to outreach.
At this point, glossary is pretty simple. I mean, I'll tell you what I've done, and my intention was to tell you where I think we need to go from here. I've gone through the existing sources we have. Littleton zoning regulations includes a glossary. Littleton downtown design standards and guidelines has a glossary. I mean, these are givens for the community. MetroVision, which we've referenced in the existing comp plan, it was referenced in Littleton 2030. We've been talking about it. It has its own glossary of terms. Littleton 2030 has a glossary. And then there's this whole long list of words that we've debated over the last several months and still not quite fully defined, even though I'm sure Webster has its own definitions. In any case, I consolidated all of that. And Dennis, I even brought you a copy.
Great, thank you.
So we can get that out to everybody, because I wasn't about to copy 389 items to everybody tonight. Surprisingly enough, there's not as much duplication as I'd have thought. There is a lot of esoteric stuff that nobody really cares about. MetroVision talks about biosolids, and I don't think anybody around here cares about that as part of comp plan. So there's a lot of esoteric terms that we can strike out there very easily. You'll note when you get this that what I've shown you is the terms or acronyms and the source. I haven't filled in the definition because I'm not going to try and transcribe 389 definitions if we're going to throw out half of them, and I hope we're going to throw out more than half of them. But it's a starting point. And I'm sure, even though I've gone through minutes and what we've produced so far in the way of draft plan to capture some of these terms that we've debated, each of you is going to find a couple that I've missed. So feel free to add. That's why I want to get it out electronically. But I'd like to just go through and have everybody just, cross off, fill in, and then we'll take it from there. Now, my intention with this was not so much to worry about the acronyms and that sort of thing. That's so that the public will know what we're talking about when we get into the discussions. But when we start talking about words like adjacent, is adjacent side by side or connected by a single point in a geometric reference? Is that, what's adjacent? See? There we go. I think I have that in here, though. We talked a lot about livability. We need to define some of those terms. I mean, Webster's definition just isn't going to sit well with what we're trying to do. So they may sound like common terms, but they're going to be customized applications for us. So that's where I want to go with it after everybody's had a chance to scrub through and say, who are you kidding? We don't need to know that. So that would be my proposed next step so that I don't have to write 389 definitions out.
Great, okay, good. Julio and Pablo, you want to talk about overview of the process?
Before I start off, I know that you made copies, a smaller one, but I wanted to make sure that you and Suzanne had a larger kind of copy. There's 2 pages of it. Pablo, you want to start off?
Go ahead.
We talked about this term outreach and trying to figure out how we're going to go from here to there. And first thing I try to do is write up a timeline. And I use some terminology that were purposely placed in there just so that for more of intriguement than anything else. January to June is the overall range of time. One of the things that I was thinking about is if we could create, or I should say, it really is not us at this point in time. It's really Dennis. If he can pull it together and get us a overall generalized draft of what we're talking about, and I think it may be this with some added functions to it that you guys came up with and we all kind of came up with and throw in here that we can kind of come up with. Simultaneous to that, because of we got to get it out. And so in order to get it out, it kind of turns out from a draft, and it really transitions itself into a survey of elements that we have, everything that we have here from circulation to implementation and everything else in between. So, and then the question becomes, between January and mid-February, which is creeping by rather quickly, about a month from now, I'm hoping we'd have a draft and a potential going out with some kind of a survey. The question is to whom? And then on the second part of this larger page that I have for you all, we listed a bunch of potential folks, okay? That was just a general level of resources that are everything from our TV audience to a number of folks that are in the community that have people that they're in contact with and can also discuss issues on a regular basis, however they want to do it. Our comment is to get them out the draft/survey and try to get it out there and get it back. I also talked about the products and discussion, the survey, and how that can go out, like I say, back to these folks, these outreach resources from Channel 9 to flyers and everybody else in between, to our own face-to-face conversations with a lot of folks on this whole thing. And I guess I was trying to, and as we were talking, I should say, we went to the next step and said, okay, we really have stakeholders in two different areas, the primary area and the secondary area of our map. So that, and I gave a list, and we created a list of who we thought was in the primary, or at least that's what I tried to do, and then who we put on the secondary list as well. Not recognizing that the folks in the primary may have a totally different response from the people from the secondary area. And we on the Planning Commission need to know the difference of where we're getting that information from, because obviously it's a very big concern. One of the things I wanted to do, and I was thinking about this, and I hadn't even talked to Pablo since after we go out and we get this back, and say we get it at the end of March. Well, one of the things I wanted to put in here between literally February to the end of March, which is about a month's time, that we do this Planning 101, where we take, and I know Pablo, this is new to Pablo, so I'm just going to bring it up and shock him all at once. But the bottom line is that just like what David said, we have a list of glossary terms and issues that we haven't determined what we like and what we don't like, if we agree upon, don't agree upon, etc. We really need to kind of sit down and do this Planning 101. And I guess I look at Dennis and I look at Suzanne, and possibly we could get somebody, to facilitate that discussion, because I think but to straighten us out on what we're going to use as terms and levels of understanding from this, because when we get this back, we're not going to have time to sit here and debate, what it means for enhancement of this and encouragement of that, and, whether or not we're talking about the historical area or we're talking about something bigger or smaller or whatever. So I'm hoping that we can kind of figure all that out in that period of time. But then following in mid-April, we have an open house so that all of us can literally talk to everybody and anybody who comes through the door and not give them different points of view, but we're all kind of at least have the same basic definitional terms so that people understand. If they go to Norm, they go to me, they go to whomever. We may not agree about certain things, but at least they know we're talking about the same thing. And that's important. I think if we don't come across that way, then, I think our credibility will go down tremendously. So anyway, that being said, after the public hearing, I think that, and based upon the discussions we get from there, we'll create a new amended final draft, I guess what I would call it, and then hopefully that would precipitate the final document or the final draft that would eventually go to the city council and make a lot of sense to them as well as to us. Now, in between there, I had a public meeting because I think the public hearing, we need to hear officially from the citizens what their concerns are, what their issues are. We need to publicly document it so we have it in CDs or whatever, so we can reflect on that, get the right information, so there's no question of what I thought they said versus what David thought they said, and we're not doing that kind of routine. We just like we do on our minutes, and get that all done, and then that's where we come down to the whole end of conclusion. Pavlos, I kind of took more than I got on a roll and started going.
I think that's very good. I do want to provide some explanations and some background in the conversations that we had. First, I think is really, it may be obvious, but I want to state it, that there were, in my opinion, at least two key assumptions that we took into our we're thinking this. That first, what we're doing right now, this is a periodic update of the central area component of the comp plan. This is not we're writing a brand new document. This is an overdue update. That's the instruction we have from council. And second, that what we wanted to, and Julio and I think agreed very much on that, and Julio talked about it a lot, what we wanted to have to show to the public is not necessarily what we thought is the final perfect document, but something that they can comment, that we shouldn't go much further before we get, are we even on the right track? So, like several people said, whatever it takes to stimulate people to come out and comment. And the timeline is designed to be tight. We recognize that if we have any major other components, any other public hearings or stuff like that goes on, that may have to get pushed a little bit, but we felt that this could be done. It could be done in that time frame. The other thing in the outreach of stakeholders and resources, one of the things, both for time expediency and as a way of saving money, we were talking about extensive use of the website, of really being able to put that report, that initial draft up on the website. We talked about having possibly a number of copies printed and available here at Littleton Center, at the library, at other locations where the public could go and view them. We know not everybody has email or website access. And then the groups that we talked there, I think the word stakeholders might be a little bit of confusion. We started thinking and saying, who are folks out there who already have their own networks that they can get the word out? So we're looking at Tom Crisopite at the Pub Forum. We're looking at Paul Bingham, he has a mailing list, Susan Thurton, the Littleton Retreat, or the Littleton Community Retreat, the Littleton Community Network, Jack Randall, the Littleton Examiner. Those are, and a number of other people there. Those are folks who come, frankly, represent a variety of different viewpoints within the city and already have established networks and established means of communicating information out to their own constituencies. Tom Mulvey has an email list. There may be others, but we felt that it would be really important to get the word out that this exists and is done as quickly as possible, and getting other folks who already have taken it upon them to do that would be a good way of doing it. And the last thing in terms of the stakeholders of the primary and the secondary area, I know others were also going to look at stakeholders and survey as well, so we didn't take that much time into it. But there was one specific issue that we had to address. On the one hand, both this process and the central area are in some respects of community-wide concern. At the same time, there are some people who have greater stake at what's going on than others. So being able to track where the information comes from is important for us to be able to assess, as well as to recognize the credibility of the responses. If we get 200 responses from all over the city on a survey, and only 2 of them are from people who have downtown businesses, and only 3 of them are for people who live in the downtown, well, that's obviously, and 50 of them are from Trailmark. I'm kind of creating sort of an exaggerated scenario. That's obviously not a result that is going to be viewed very credibly, either by us or by the community. If it's the other way around, I think that's something that will be viewed more credibly. And one other thing was actually a suggestion of Dale Shields, a neighbor of mine, in terms of stakeholders of the secondary area and ways of doing outreach that did not get included, is neighborhood watch groups and like National Night Out groups. I don't know how we can get that information from the Littleton Police Department, but especially in a lot of the secondary areas here where there are not that many HOAs, neighborhood watch groups and places where National Night Out happens, those are areas that we have contacts and indicate some kind of an organized neighborhood response, and we may think creatively of other ways that we can reach it out. And frankly, I think flyers and door-to-door would be very useful as well.
I guess the final comment is a lot of this is going to be pushed to some degree back on your shoulders, Dennis, and I guess I'm concerned about whether or not, one, you're in a position to do it, and two, if you need help, now's the time for us to talk about it, especially even before we go to the city council for a joint meeting, so they understand kind of where, we can do miracles, but, we're good at what we do, but we have limitations. And I guess we purposely kept this pretty tight, and we do recognize the need for some possible outside help. Everything from somebody from the surveying side of this, it might be that everything that we have compiled might go to a surveyor, and they will come up with a list of questions that could be a formal survey for all intents and purposes to get us to go there. And not to mention that all the stuff we do come out would still go on the website and everything else. Don't get me wrong when I say that, but the concept is to try to get some organization and some trail to this, because I think what Pavlos and I both agree to, it's very important where the information comes back from, and we want to certainly see more information from the central area. Not to say that everybody else's comments are not appropriate, but there's a strong there's a good number of people that have a lot at stake down here, and they need to hear from their own constituents and everything else what's going on, rather than somebody who, I hate to put it this way, that may not have come down to downtown in the last 2 years.
Sure. And when we get to Steve and Linda, they may have some discussion about that too. I think we've had some discussion previously about there are different ways to do that. Maybe we put more emphasis on interviews to get that information from the stakeholders that actually have those kind of interests downtown. and how we distribute those surveys too. So I think we can think about all those things. That's good.
The other thing also that we wanted to say, by having the survey as well as the open house, as well as the public hearing and other things, is we wanted to create an environment where we could solicit as much different public input and as diverse. The problem with the public hearing is it is on a certain Monday evening, and there may be some people who can never come on a Monday evening. Having a survey allows folks who get, to have something on paper that have a certain amount of time with which to respond. Having an open house gives another more informal opportunity. Some people may be intimidated by public hearings. So we really wanted to bring in a diverse. It does create a bit of an issue of how do we weigh everything, but to some extent I think that is, that's the judgment call that we will be made. That's part of what we'll try to do in the public hearing. And in the end, of course, when we say June final product, that's the final product that we'll deliver to the council. The council will have its own process of reviewing and soliciting public input as well. So we're not providing the be-all and end-all. And then again, this is also a process that we see that will get revisited and get updated. We're not talking about this is the 30-year plan for downtown. This is what we see as the update, and we feel that there should be periodic updates every 5 or so years. We're just a bit overdue on this one.
Good. It sounds like it's a good transition into Linda and Steve at this point. So, did I hand these out already?
No, you didn't.
Okay, great.
Linda, do you want to go ahead? I made some notes, much as I did with the historic preservation part. Do you want me to go through that?
Why don't you go through it?
You jump in. I think I included some of your comments. Linda and I got together regarding stakeholders, and I suggested that we do something in the form of a flow chart or a tree. Again, thinking this can translate to other areas. And as Julio and Pavlos were talking, I thought about some of these categories. In the discussion, Linda made a very salient point that the state, I believe, has a regulation requiring us to address tourism, which would fall under the category of visitors. You professional planners are more familiar with this, and she reminded me of it. I think I'd heard it before. But in our comp plan, according to the state, we need to address that. Let me digress slightly here. Dave has a funny look on his face. Dave, I can't explain it to you, but we seem to have some concurrence from the professional planners, so nonetheless we will need to comply with state regulations to have a credible comp plan. I had some feedback from a friend who's involved and pays attention and regarding considering visitors, particularly to the downtown area, but visitors to Littleton as being stakeholders. And I think that it's not only the tourism aspect is necessary, but it involves things like parking, the visitors to businesses, the visitors to cultural events, and so on. If you don't consider their input and you only take the input on parking, say, from businesses, it's been suggested that if there's not an open space in front of a business, the business owner thinks there's a parking problem. And you would need the input from visitors, perhaps, to balance that sort of extreme viewpoint. I don't know if any of them really have that, but I've heard it stated that way. So stakeholders, to me, implies perhaps that they're owners of a property, and we've addressed that. Here we've got business owners, residents that own a property, some in part of a multi-unit situation, both businesses and so on. You'll see there's some interactions in the categories. And my thought, and Linda put this chart together, I couldn't have done this if I'd had a week. Unfortunately, and I couldn't even get it printed out after she emailed it, and Dennis was very fast to get it put together. But we put a couple of examples under some of these categories. You mentioned just a few minutes ago a neighborhood watch group which would go under the miscellaneous associations, homeowners associations. The other advantage of this format is we can use it in other sections. There may be neighborhoods that are entirely residential, such as Trailmark, that don't have significant cultural visitors and things like that, but at least if that category is empty, we realize that we can't think of any group that would go in there that would be a stakeholder in that neighborhood or in that corridor for the future. And so my challenge to the rest of the board members is come up with a group. Hoodlum would be an example. They're an association of business owners. You guys come up with a group between now and the next meeting that can't be categorized in one of these, and then we'll add a category for it. Otherwise, we've managed to cover all the bases, and we simply need to put these in. I won't go through all of the details, but the list that Dennis handed out of central area stakeholders, I read through that and thought I could assign each of those into one of these categories. So that's my suggestion, is that we use this form. As far as the survey, I feel like if we try to put together a survey, we're going to be reinventing the wheel, and that's where I think we would need professional help. Not that perhaps some friends haven't suggested that I need professional help. They'll have to get along with me like I am. But I think there's, of course, political survey groups that know how to get a response back. Julio and Pavlos had the list of resources, which was good, and some of those, I guess, this list would translate the homeowners associations have a mailing list, some of them have an email list. The cultural groups have mailing lists. You could leave surveys perhaps down at Town Hall Arts Center. They, of course, have the list of season ticket holders and so on. Littleton Historic Incorporated would be interested in the downtown historic district, of course. You've got the Friends of the Library Museum with their email and their mailing lists. There's quite an extensive list. We focused more on the organization this time than actually putting everybody into it. And then for downtown, I think next time, if the board finds this to be a reasonable organizational model, then we'll try to think of everybody in the downtown area, put them into this, and identify them as sub-area participants or as, the center area participants, perhaps.
We got rid of the name stakeholders.
It doesn't seem to apply to visitors, I guess, and so I liked participants.
I like this. I mean, I like the idea of participants and of thinking of visitors, because we keep talking about, downtown economic vitality and economic development, where if people are not going to shop there, well, where's the vitality? And it opens up a lot of other possibilities in our outreach stakeholders. We really try to focus on the non-official ones, just kind of thinking outside of the box, thinking that you guys will probably come up with a lot of the official ones. But yeah, there is. I would not have thought of the season ticket holders of the Town Hall Arts Center as a group that we may want to consider to be a stakeholder. And explicitly reach out to them, because, yeah, those are people who have shown some commitment to at least Town Hall Arts Center, and to some extent, presumably, that's not the only time they come downtown.
And I think they're likely to perhaps have dinner before, shopping beforehand, perhaps. Okay. You've got the people that come down to visit the haunted house, really a once-a-year cultural event. But this organization kind of lends itself to, fill up each category with as many examples as you can, and then try to talk to everybody, I guess, because it's going to be hard to get people engaged.
Great. Good work, all. Thank you very much.
How's that for timely? I think we have a minute left.
Something has come up that I wasn't anticipating, that is, we actually have concurrent meeting tonight with Historic Preservation Board, and they suggested that they would like to meet you at some point tonight if we have a break in here, either now or after we talk about the joint study session with City Council. Just have them come briefly and introduce you, the Planning Commission and the Historic Preservation Board. So, when we get into the Joint Planning Commission City Council study session, first thing I need is a head count in terms of who all is going to be able to make that on the 27th. 1, 2, 3, 4. Kevin, you're not able to? Okay. So we've got 7 out of 8.
That's at the regular Tuesday,
Yes.
well, not the regular time, but it is on Tuesday
on Tuesday.
at 7 p.m. here.
Okay. Draft agenda in terms of what you would like to talk to City Council about. Last time we put together an agenda and talking points. Here's what we did last time. And we kind of veered from that, I think, when we got into the meeting itself, but that's kind of where we started. And I think City Council would like to see an agenda, a draft agenda, go to them so they could respond to that and see if they have other things they'd like to cover. They'd like the initial agenda to come from you at least. So if you have thoughts on what that would be.
Dennis, I believe I was away at the time that was decided, but it would be useful to me. My understanding is that was City Council that asked for this meeting, not ourselves.
It's a standard outreach meeting they have every year.
Okay.
So it's not a specific request from council to meet with you right now.
Right.
It's just on their general outreach calendar. They would typically meet with the Planning Commission at this meeting in January.
Okay.
We did last year.
That does
We do
help
every year. Right.
clarify things.
So this will be in the form of a discussion rather than specific motions, votes, and that sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
It's
very
a general
informative.
discussion, and I did have a discussion briefly with the mayor today about some of the things he might like to see at that meeting. He did indicate he would like to see a timeline. So I think much like what was presented tonight in terms of maybe you all need to decide if that's a schedule you're comfortable with. If we're going to add some kind of 101 or a workshop, maybe we should go ahead and try to set that so we can let them know when that is going to be. They also wanted to talk about parking in light of their decision not to do a study, beyond just the comp plan. How does the Planning Commission, as you know, you all are advisory on issues related to the land use code. So, for instance, parking standards, how do you feel about those right now? Do you think that they're too high? I mean, I think this is a lot of what Kevin brought up tonight, but is that something you want to go out with the survey? You may want to try to include that in your discussion, but I think they are looking for some ideas from you all in terms of what to do with the parking issue at this time. If parking's not a problem, then it's probably time to look at the code in terms of the restrictions that we have. So that's about all I can offer you in terms of guidance of what they're interested in, and then if you're interested in other topics, I'm sure they'd be willing to.
One of the topics, and I agree with, I think you just touched upon something, Suzanne, that I think is very important, and I think I'd like to take a brief moment to see if I can get the other commissioners to kind of think about this as a result of doing this central planning area, this comprehensive plan. As we move along, I'm anticipating that we're going to have a good number of implementation policies, if you will. And I think you guys touched upon it with the zoning code, the parking, and a number of other items you had in there that I can't quickly tell you about. But I think the zoning process being too restrictive and things of that sort, I would like to throw certain things on the table as we speak. Personally, from my standpoint, I think that there's an overlap or even maybe a parallel mode of what we're trying to do. We're trying to do a comp plan for the central area, but I also want to see us kind of get working on the the land use side of this central neighborhood area too, once we determine what is the areas of points of implementation, which to me will be addressed in the land use code for this specific area. I think it's a good starting point. I think it'll keep us all engaged on a lot of the things that we want to see. I mean, what Kurt and Kevin came up with, our development codes are determine the final product, emphasis on parking over form, blah, blah, blah. I think those are all very strong statements that we need to address. And I don't want to come back to it, to be honest with you, in a year from now for the central area or for the rest and saying, what were we really thinking about? I think that as we're moving along, I think the emphasis on the implementation side, and I guess what I was going to get at without rambling too much, personally, I like to see us throw out the TIS, the CA, and the R5 for the entire area and start with a clean slate.
And I.
And go from there. Because I think that what we have is not something that we can just put a Band-Aid on and say it's good to go. I think it's a mess. It's not working well. It is restrictive just because of its own weight more than anything else. I hate to put it that way, but it's true. I would like to see us really, as we're talking about this, and it's not subject to the 6 months between now and June to get it done, but it's something that I think we need to get done before we start moving on to the rest of the city, because then we're going to have a little bit more of a basis to work from than we currently have. This is literally the foundation of the entire comp plan or update to the entire city comp plan. So I think it's a good point to.
I think it's a good, and you just made a great point too. I think that too often, I think we feel the compulsion to go forward to the next planning effort without the implementation, and so the implementation really gets left behind. And it's really key, I think, that we really take time and really structure the schedule for that as well. That really set our priorities and see what we want to accomplish out of the plan. So I think it's a great point.
And and I was thinking about this that and maybe it's not something that we initially do. Maybe it's something, again, I'm going to throw out the term consultant and the concept of money, but I was just, without knowing all of your practices and things of that sort, I'm just going to say, like I know Dick Farley has done a lot of work in the city of Littleton. He probably has one of the better historical backgrounds when it comes to regulations and how things work around here better than virtually any of us. And I would like to see something created for both the primary area and the secondary area, so we don't get it all this too confusing as we kind of move through things. I think it's just that important. You could put it in the guise of land use. I just look at more of as a development code that is going to take it. But I really strongly feel comfortable in saying I think the TIS and the CA and the R5 are just obsolete. From what we're dealing with. We have tried historically to make them work together, and we, with this goofy line that we have, and you can do it here, but you can't do it there, and it's like a DMZ as far as I'm concerned. And so that all being said, and then you throw a TIS on top of all of that, and you're going, geez, and everybody's trying to figure out, well, and then the other thing is, who has the right to do this? Does it stop here? Does it go to the city council? Or does it, are there more things that can be done even administratively that are more, once we've gone through all of the hashing out of the implementation side of this thing? So it is less restrictive, more streamlined, and more palatable to virtually everybody who needs to go through this process.
Julio, if I'm reading you right, what you're saying is once we've amalgamated all this input we've got, identifying issues, what's hot, what's not, alternatives on how we would propose through a comp plan to go about realizing, what elements we'd want to realize.
Correct.
Okay. Then what you're saying is this joint meeting would be a good time to start looking ahead with council beyond that, saying, okay, once we've come up with the vision and the elements, we've got to start working together ahead of time to determine what we can change in implementation, policies, regulations, that sort of thing. It isn't in isolation. One is inevitably going to lead to the other. What are they willing to do? What are they willing to contemplate now before we put 6 months' worth of work into it?
If we can get to that.
As a topic.
Yes, as a topic, I think it's a good.
Is there anybody who doesn't think that should be a topic? I think.
I'd like to emphasize too, but Julio and Pablo started getting into stakeholders and basically the opinion change makers in our community. And I'd like to see their buy-in, honestly, because if they're bought in, this thing is going to move. If they're not, one side or the other is going to kill it.
I'd rather know sooner than later.
Yeah, I'd like to know right out of the gate that they think it's a piece of junk and move on.
Well, the process we've outlined so far, unless I'm misinterpreting, okay, we're not really looking strongly at categorizing participants, Norm, not stakeholders. We're not looking at strong metrics on evaluating. So many of a certain percentage of the property owners think this, but a different percentage of the shoppers who tend to frequent downtown think that. We're outlining a subjective process that is going to be given to a lot of anecdotal information. The only way we're going to make sense of it is to make sure that we understand when somebody is presenting opinions or their hot spots, we know where they're coming from. Okay, it doesn't have to be in fixed categories, but we all at least have to know where they're coming from as a filter for putting those opinions into perspective. So I have no problem with a subjective process as long as we make it plain to everybody that that's what it is. It's not going to be a calculated, 97% say this and 47% say that. Nothing wrong with that, but we need to be plain that that's what it is.
The way Julio and I think looked at it, at least the way definitely I looked at it, is, we recognize it is subjective. We're not talking about statistical analysis here, but we also recognize that this subjective process has to be seen as credible and legitimate in the community, and that's where our judgment comes in, that we need to be able to get a sense of what the community out there feels, and that we need to be able to support the decisions that we make. That's why we have multiple different ways of receiving input. But in the end, it's going to be something that is subjective, and to really say otherwise, I think, is kidding ourselves. Otherwise, we would literally just draft something, put it out there, and put it on a yay or nay vote, and move it up or down. We won't have a comp plan. We'll have an assortment of votes.
So what I guess I'm hearing so far for the agenda, we're going to respond to what the mayor said in terms of timeline, what we're looking at. In terms of parking, kind of what we're thinking, but in a larger context of the implementation and buy-in for that follow-up process, that second part of the process here. Third is kind of we're talking about in terms of process, in terms of the outreach, the stakeholders, the participants we've talked about, and what we're looking at. So we kind of run that by them too, in terms of here's what we're thinking in terms of the outreach process itself and how we do the survey and what we're thinking about, and see if they're comfortable with that as well. Is that right? Have I missed anything so far? Okay.
Not so far. I would like to throw out at least for the opinion of the other folks is definitely something that I feel fairly strongly about. But the city of Littleton's been talking a lot about green this and green that, and there's been a lot of issues about sustainability and others, but I don't have a really good sense of how and if they want issues, ecological, green, sustainability, to be incorporated within the planning process. And I think actually I personally would really appreciate a more informal structure, which it sounds like that's what we're going to have, as opposed to our last meeting, which was very formalized, to really discuss that, throw out some ideas, maybe get their input and say, as we're moving along with this comp plan, to what degree do you want us to incorporate broader issues of ecological sensibility, sustainability, and others within that process?
You know, I like what you're saying. I just
Timing.
question whether or not we could hit that kind of to me, that's a question that I would look at it in a joint retreat or a joint time period where you had like 5 to 6, maybe 8 hours to kind of pull that together. I mean, those are really, when you say sustainability in this day and age, there's a big price tag with it, and it takes a lot of support and a lot of initiative to really create that when you start looking at it in a citywide program. And I'm not trying to be negative, don't get me wrong when I'm saying that. Plus, to be quite honest, I think we all have a different definition of what the term sustainability means, and that's one of my pet peeves with the term, because everybody I talk to has a different impression on what they believe and on what that means. And it's like that goes back to my glossary questions and definitions that we really need to kind of figure out ahead of time, even amongst ourselves.
Well, maybe we can take advantage of that, the fact that we're in a limited time frame. Really, we're talking about two different groups of talking points or agenda items. One is our process, and Dennis, you listed, 3 points? One was timeline, the outreach process. What did I miss? Well, I'm not sure. That's not part of our process. That's a subject within the process.
Implementation, I think.
Okay, right. Okay, yeah, because the implementation of what Julio brought up. The other thing we might want to talk about is the format, the things that Kurt and Kevin were trying to bring up, is rather than presenting a fait accompli or a proposed plan at this stage, highlight issues and get feedback, find out what's hot, what's not. I think if we cover those 4 points as far as our process is concerned, then we can start as a separate topic. Just let's get some feedback. What are we all thinking when we start talking about parking or parking problems? What Norm may perceive as a parking problem with the time limit, and so does my wife, Norm, so you and she can get together.
We shop together a lot.
I must be. Somebody else is going to see as only a problem under certain conditions. So let's get that out there and talk about those parameters of the parking issue. Same thing for sustainability. Sustainability's been thrown out a couple times, starting with the council's workshop last year. So great. What's it mean as far as a comp plan? I know what it means as far as building a new institutional building or somebody building a house, Norm. But what does it mean for the city in a comprehensive plan? So let's talk about that to at least get us all on the same ground. For that matter, I can think of another topic. Does everybody on council and everybody on the planning commission think about mixed use the same way? And quite frankly, mixed use is nothing new. It was in the old comp plan. It's been around for 27 years. So nobody's throwing a new, joker in the deck.
Affordable housing.
Affordable housing, right? So why don't we find some of those issues? Half a dozen, no more than that. Back to your half a dozen from the last meeting. And identify and present it to council and say, look, we'd like to spend a few minutes talking about each of them so we all see what we have in mind when we use the words. Otherwise, we're going to be hard-pressed to go out to the public and ask them for feedback, in my opinion.
I agree, if I may. Julio, I think you make a good point. My purpose is precisely because this is an informal environment, that this would be a good time to initiate kind of a conversation and say, well, you see it, you see the banner as you drive down into downtown, you see it on the website, you talk about this is a green thing. Well, when it comes to the planning process, have the thought about it. What's their mind? I'll be perfectly willing in terms of sustainability to provide with some standard, there's a Sustainable Communities Initiative, there's a Transition Town Movement, there's certain standard processes that are fairly comprehensive and fairly far-reaching. I can easily put together some information about that stuff, present it to council and say, is this something that you're even interested in?
Skewed toward the planning process.
Exactly, yeah.
But I think I think they're going to want us to focus on what have we been doing in the past months and define, have we been updating the comp plan? What have we done? What have we deleted? What have we added? Kind of go over what we've accomplished in some of our meetings, because they're going to want to find out what we're doing with our time. And I think that if we focus on the process and the timelines that we have, and really flesh out maybe a little bit more of those details, then I think that we can, they can be confident that we've got a solid process moving forward, and that we will be able to finish this in the timeline that has been provided. So I'm taking a far more practical, approach. Let's tell them what we've been doing.
And we started talking about that. That's what we're going with the timeline and the outreach plan. So we've got those elements. The issues are more a question of, look, we know these have been talked about. Sometimes they've been talked around. So let's get us all on the same page so we at least know where we're all coming from.
And Linda,
actually, if you want to talk about where we are or being able to show them where we are, rather than writing definitions, what I've been doing the last couple of weeks is taking the existing comp plan for central area, retyping everything, and then matching goals and issues from it for the central area with what we've drafted so far. So we can show where we've matched up, where we've got gaps, where we have new issues. So we've got a side-by-side presentation before, by next meeting. That also is on this CD, by the way.
Okay.
So everybody can get it. We can go through and say, here's what we've covered, in line with council's charge that we revisit comp plan, strengths, weaknesses, gaps, out-of-date issues. We can go through this, update it for the next meeting, and we'll have something to show them. Here's what we started with, here's the direction we've taken with it, or here's what we recognized is no longer valid. So at least we'll have something concrete to show them.
I think I'd like to make a motion here to facilitate this, and I believe we need to include, or at least discuss, but include some things that we want them to see, because our next meeting is the day before, so it will go into the packets for them before our next meeting. Right. So my motion is that we include this draft of the central area that we received tonight. We include the timeline that Julio and Pavlos suggested, and that we then thirdly include for them to review our methodology involving the area participants into their packets. Now, if you want to add something else, and Dennis comes up with some other things, then amend my motion.
We have a second on the motion, so we can amend it?
I'll second it.
Okay. Amendments?
Yes, I want to add what Kurt and Kevin have come up with as well. I think it's also, as a point of discussion, I think it's important that we all I'm going to say, I'm going to use this time a little bit differently than I normally would, but I think it's important that we discuss as a group, since last November or thereabouts, when the major change, I guess, was it November or was it earlier when we had
October?
Was it October?
When I was gone.
That we started off really slow. I make no bones about it. It took a long time for us to kind of get comfortable with each other, and recognizing the fact that that in and of itself took its own amount of time realistically. And so that now we have I think there's a better trust level, comfort level, without trying to get political. I'm not trying to do that, but I'm just trying to say, hey, look, I didn't know everybody here before you all came on board, and so, it just takes time to warm up to folks. And I think from my standpoint, I feel very comfortable with all of you, and your different positions or whatever. I mean, it's just the comfort level. But I think that it's something that also needs to be expressed to the city council. I mean, we were kind of all thrown in the water at the same time, swim or not, and that's what we're getting better at the swimming part of it. And I think that's what's encouraging by what we're able to present to them at this meeting, to the point where we're going to try and do our best to make sure by June of this year, and I'm not going to say it's the 1st or the 30th, but it's going to be somewhere in there that we're going to get this sucker done, or thereabouts, or they'll know why we haven't, put it that way. But that's my goal. I mean, my goal is quite clear. I want to see if we can do it. I think knowing that we're putting a lot of pressure on Dennis, we may need to get some outside help. I mean, those are the caveats. I think we need to put in for this timeline as well, that realistically, and we're going to need their support. We just can't do this in a vacuum. And that's what I'm saying.
And the good news is we have that capacity to get outside support with this as well. So
Okay, so we've got a motion to amend the motion.
I'll second that.
Okay. So, Norm, if I understand it, we're saying we want to present the timeline, the outreach, and
the Central Area Small Plan draft
right.
was
And
my
then
original.
with Julio's motion to amend, we will also want to include the stuff that Kevin and Kurt put together as far as how we go out to them or what we take out to them.
I would like to also amend it to adding your report that you've got comparing the comp plan with what we've done so far
Okay,
on the central area.
I'll tell you at this point that it's all of about 3 pages of what's going to be about double that. It needs to be, if we're really going to show a comparison, unless all we want to be able to do is say,
This is where we're at.
this is where we're at. This is not something we generated out of whole cloth. It's definitely tied to what you asked us to do.
Yes, what you've got written there is a direct correlation with exactly what they asked us to do. And from their workshop and at our last meeting with them, they asked us to basically do what you just wrote there.
And I think, it's,
I'll second that.
and I guess I'm going to state that I think it's really important that Dennis let us know on the day before, kind of like what you can do on your own and what you're going to need help with. So that is also thrown into the mix when we talk to the city council.
absolutely, you bet.
I mean, it's critical.
Right, and we can pretty much tell you that at this point, I think.
Okay.
It's kind of evolved over time from when we had the budget hearings. We were early enough in the process, I wasn't quite sure where we were going, if we were going to need to do a market study or what we were doing, but it's becoming pretty clear, what the kind of information we need, so.
We have one motion and 2 amendments on the
call the
floor.
question.
And then,
Yeah, we're collecting them rapidly.
yeah. So, I'd like to call the question.
But
Can I make a comment on including the central area, small area plan? I'm concerned that if we hand this out, that city council is going to be totally enmeshed in the details about, instead of understanding that this is kind of where we're going, they might be kind of stuck on some of the words or stuck on the format or, when this could completely change after we go to the public.
Can we print that with draft in red rather than just gray? I mean, if we're gonna tell them or show them what we've been doing, one way or another, we have to show it to them. We can't just say, "Hey, trust us, we've been doing stuff."
I'm not so sure it's going to make any sense to them at all.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, I believe the question was called.
Yeah, so I'd like to call the question.
Okay. Actually, we should vote on the amendments separately, right?
Yes.
So the last amendment was to include the comparison side by side of comp plan with what we've drafted so far on the central area goals. And Dennis, although I've got it here, I'd like you to proof that for me. So, because a lot of this, you'll notice as you go through this when everybody else gets a copy, we've got 2 or 3 goals sometimes supporting or matching up with one from the existing comp plan. So all those in favor of amending say aye.
Very good.
Trailing behind again. Second amendment was to add in the Kurt and Kevin's issues, identification list statements, and vision statement. All those in favor? And now the overall amendment, or the overall motion to present the collected materials tonight, the timeline, the outreach plan and stakeholder or participant list, as well as those latter two issues, the central area, small area plan draft with the comparison and the vision statement and hit list to council for their consideration and preparation for the meeting. In favor, say aye. That was easy.
I don't believe I used the term hit list, but
I'm struggling to come up with something to add on to the fact that it's more than just a vision statement. It's elaborating on it in a lot greater detail.
I'd like to make a suggestion, but before, and I don't know whether we need to do that as a motion or not, but I wanted to ask you. I know definitely in terms of, I can say in terms of what Julio and I presented, and that's probably true of others, and I think you addressed it a little bit, Dave, that what we brought in here was really designed to be shared among us, not necessarily prepared to be completely ready to be handled to council. So I would like to see if each group has a couple of days to, if they want to or need to, polish things up a little bit and provide you with a little bit more polished version to come in.
Okay.
Does that seem?
And personally, I'd like to, for the city council, I would like to flesh out a little bit more details for the timeline, and I think that might be something that everybody would be interested in. I don't know what you guys think.
Well, are you suggesting that we hash out more the timeline here among the whole group, or that Julio and I simply take the notes he's got plus some of the points that we made, presented in a little bit more understandable form?
Right now, we're still presenting this and discussing this even amongst ourselves as the direction we're taking.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not a cut and dry deal at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just saying that in terms of the exact copies that were being passed around were probably designed to be passed around for internal use, not necessarily to be presented as is to council. But yes, the idea still being that those are not adopted documents, those are suggestions that have been made.
They're working products.
Yes.
They're not outcomes. Right. I guess the one thing I'd like to ask in that line is, Kevin, could you and Kurt put a little blurb in as to defining what all those points are intended to do, how the idea is to provoke or stimulate the discussion and get feedback? Because I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I think that.
And Julio, you're okay with, Julio, maybe you and I can clean that up a little bit and get it to Dennis in the next couple of days?
I guess I'm going to let you clean it up.
All right.
I'm kind of cleaned out.
Okay. I can easily do that. Dennis, by when would you like to have electronic?
By the end of the week would be great.
Okay, that'll be great.
The next item on the agenda is draft goals and policies, basically that draft.
Wait.
Okay, sorry. Yes?
Some of the issues I see that the city council might try to discuss, and I think we've talked about it a little bit, but I'm going to guess that they're going to want to know exactly what our strategy to go to the neighborhoods is, and what are we going to take to the neighborhoods? What are some of the documents that we're going to take in addition to what we came up with in our meeting? Like, for example, why does the comp plan need to be updated right now, and why is the comp plan outdated, and existing, why do we have problems with the current comp plan? Maybe some of those ideas documented, they might ask us about, they might not, I don't know.
Well, in the first place, we're not going out to the neighborhoods right now. We're not talking about the neighborhood plans. We're only talking about the central area neighborhood. So that's I think, the next stage. We're not really ready. We haven't talked about it. We're really not ready to talk about that, or much less present it to council.
I'm meaning the neighborhood as in the central area plan.
Well.
Yeah. Just some ideas.
I guess, to me, we're operating at their direction to start here and update the comp plan. So if they ask us, why do we think the comp plan needs to be updated, we tell them because you said it needs to be. It's been amended since 1980.
Very good.
But it's, we're serving at their pleasure and starting in the central area at their direction. And so I guess my motion was designed to get those things together so that it could be in their packet before the study session, and that we would have to do it understanding all these things are draft documents, and I don't think any of them are really going to hold anything against us, but it's draft documents, and so much the better if somebody looks at that and says, oh, wait a minute, what are they doing? Let's generate the interest and get the public to comment. A negative comment to me is just dandy, because I don't have any predetermined outcome for this. Maybe somebody will come and make a very credible point about take that out of your comp plan update, and we all look at each other and say, sure, it's just draft, as the chair pointed out. Maybe put it in red.
Dave's comparison there between the comp plan and our draft that we're at now is pretty much showing on why we feel the comp plan has been outdated and why it needed to be updated.
Well, in some cases, we're just repeating what was already in the comp plan. In other cases, we're looking a little deeper and going beyond and suggesting that they've missed something the first time around. Not so much the central area plan, but some of the other neighborhoods, we're going to find things that just flat out are either contradictory, which is one of the things council asks us to look for, or are no longer applicable. I don't think we have to talk about preparing for light rail transit anymore, because all we have to do now is talk about how we deal with it effectively. So we're doing that evolution, which is, I think, what we're looking for. I'd hate to think they're going to be asking us why, unless they're asking themselves why they ever ask it in the first place. But otherwise, all we really need to be prepared to do is show them the direction we're taking, how we've responded to what they ask us to do, and where we think we're headed. And while we're talking about that, as Julio says, let's think beyond this product to how we then work with them to implement it and, feel our way around some of these issues like sustainability and parking. I think that's a pretty good agenda for, what do we have, Suzanne, 2 hours with them? Yeah, that's a pretty full boat.
Yeah.
Are we ready to go on to the next topic, which is the draft goals and policies? I only have 5 minutes on this, and I just wanted to quickly say what I'll be doing is continue to flush those out. I'll be adding more policies, just in a response for your response. So if you can go through those, I think we'd like to cover those at the next meeting. And again, we're going to send out what's currently drafted at this point out in the packets, but we're going to I'll keep working on them as well, so that we've got getting closer to that final document, adding that overview that we talked about, adding the vision statement that we've got, so continue to flush this out as more of a complete plan, working more on the implementation as well, and the sections that don't have much in them at this point. And a lot of the policies that we have are the ones that we've already talked about, so there needs to be additional policies written for each of those goals. So
We had talked about having a separate section for the parking.
yeah, and when I went through the circulation, it didn't seem as necessary, but read through it and see what you think. If it really stands out as something that's distinct, to me it's so integral to the circulation that it seemed like it worked when I went through it and was writing it, but it certainly can do it.
Because I thought we had more than one goal's worth of stuff that we had just put aside because we were going to get to a parking section at a later date.
That's all that I found, but if we can go back and find more, I'll go look again and see.
Actually, Dennis did a pretty good job of taking a lot of replication, which we noted in the last 2 meetings, and consolidated it. We may differ on where it should be or how it should be phrased, and that's what we really ought to look at for next week to give him the feedback.
Absolutely.
Actually, we ought to look at it before that.
Right, and if I did leave things out, if there's something that really is just obviously missing at this point.
Dennis, I try to go through my notes from the 2 sessions where we were approving this and disapproving that and rewording this and moving this, and the fact that you came up with this much is absolutely amazing.
Okay. Thanks. Julio?
I don't know where you want to put it. I was looking at it in what Kevin and Kurt came up with, and I'm also looking at it for what you came up with. But I'm very concerned about the TOD aspect of this, trans-oriented development, and how that will impact the land use per se. I know in the past we've had the TIS, and we kind of played that with it, but since we're not, at least from my standpoint, I don't think the TIS is a valid way to go. I would like to see us kind of hone in on this new terminology called TOD and see how we're going to deal with it.
And not limit ourselves to a nice, neat, clean radius.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't work very well. Norm?
Perhaps I missed it, but the comparison that David has apparently on the CD, I think I would like to have that sooner rather than later to work through this. I think that's very
That's
well
why I
done,
brought it
very
tonight,
good
so
idea.
Dennis could circulate it.
Good. Yeah.
I would concur.
If maybe you can email that out to us, and even before we would normally get a package.
Actually,
for
if
the
you can
next-
email it to us, tomorrow, since it's already there, that would be
Yeah, and really, that's two things we can do with this central area draft plan. One is make sure we've got everything connected, the lines connected with the comparison, as well as making sure that everything we've talked about the last couple sessions we've got wrapped into here.
Good. Okay. For the next meeting, if the subcommittees have done additional work, we'll have a report from them. I want to start bringing some of the data to you, just in terms of background, and been working with our IS department and with Eric from BIAC, and they're really being very helpful in terms of putting together some data that is more applicable for, I think, our process and what the city uses typically. And
Can you give us some for instances, Dennis? What kind of data?
Sure, just the basic land use and ownership, assemblages, that kind of stuff, real simple stuff. House zoning, the different layers that we can actually use, and something we can update on a regular basis too, so that we can continually have current information, which I think is what's going to be essential for this area plan. this area plan.
Again, isn't some of that in the background information on the characteristics of downtown area?
Some of it is. It's not. Yeah, it's there.
It's not current necessarily.
It's not current, and it's not updatable, and that's what we really need, I think, is that in order to implement this on a regular basis, we need to know how things are changing, what kind of assemblages, what kind of ownership, what's happening with the zoning as it changes, so we really have a current picture. So that's what we're trying to structure for implementation.
Is enough of this still valid that it's worth at least reviewing?
Oh, absolutely.
Before
It
next-
really has
okay.
not changed that much, yeah.
Yeah, that's under some of the first section. Actually, it's in the preamble section.
Well, one of the things too, when you're talking about data and updatable, is the hope that we get back, that part of the goals of our process is also to develop a system through which this gets done on a fairly regular basis. So that at least every 5 years, we do go on and we review everything. So
It could be a fairly simple review, and so you need some way to figure out, how do we measure this? How do we measure our success? Are we achieving it? Is it still current? So that type of stuff. Yeah.
Is that something else we need to talk about with council, or can we save that for the next joint session?
I would say that we save it for the next. I think it's just sort of as we're thinking all this, because part of what we said is the point of doing the downtown area first is not only is it the highest priority, it's also the one area that in many respects has components of almost every other aspect of the city. So it's a good training.
So we can mention to council that that's one of the elements we're considering is how we structure updating, but we really haven't gotten into it yet, so we're not going to talk about it in detail.
No.
Okay.
Dennis, I do have a question on the draft agenda that you've got. You have report from subcommittees. Are you foreseeing, there were some items from last meeting that were not assigned to anybody. Are you foreseeing new subcommittees, or the subcommittees
I was
continuing
just
the
leaving
work?
that open in case we did that tonight. I don't think we need that at this point, unless you do additional work and want to report back. But other than that, no, there's no additional work. I think we've done.
The only thing I'd like to do on the glossary is get everybody to take a look at it and either add something or just, say, are you kidding me? We don't need this.
Great.
And then I can start fleshing it out.
Okay, good.
I thought with the participants, stakeholders, maybe we'd get together and assign all the groups we could think of. We've mentioned a dozen or so.
Great.
And then we'll bring that back to the commission for review and editing.
Should we do anything with the surveys?
I think if you could start formulate in terms of the kind of information we want to get, what are we really looking for? So kind of that big picture stuff in terms of format. How are we going to use these? What information? And just the real core of that, I think, would be very helpful. So.
And in the meantime, it sounds like everybody's in consensus that we should bring someone on board for the surveys. So I think Dennis and I will start looking at that in the next couple of weeks, try to get somebody under contract and bring them in to have a discussion with you all. If we're really going to shoot for getting a survey done by mid-February, we probably need to get someone hired in the next couple of
Yeah, the casual discussions through Tom Christopite and whoever else as focal centers, or the casual open houses, that sort of thing we have is pretty easy. But if we're going to start doing surveys, or even something on the website, we're going to have to get it pretty neatly organized.
Absolutely. The other thing we talked about was interviews, and I think that takes a tremendous amount of organization on our part. But again, I think it might be one of the most effective tools we have for reaching those people you were talking about, the key stakeholders. We make sure we've got that kind of coverage. So it's us going out one-on-one probably and doing interviews with these people, but we really need to know what we're asking and get our information together. So.
Then those are the subcommittees that really need to work on it a little bit and come back for next time.
That's
make some
something,
progress.
as Suzanne said, I think that we may get the survey teams to help us with those interviews as well, because I think it all fits together. It has to be a big picture.
Directly that Linda and Norm agreed to go on a Saturday night and on the cultural side and all, and on the,
I'll be shopping with Dave's wife, I'm sorry.
that's
Great.
right.
Well, and one thing that we could do that's sort of like interviews is if the survey is organized in such a way that it allows for some more open-ended things, is that we can actively encourage certain key stakeholders to not just fill out the survey by putting X's here and there, but to actually provide us with a narrative or answer some broader questions.
Yeah, I think as long as we limit that, I think you're right. It'd be very.
It can be certain people that we say we would definitely, like hoodlum, like
It's so hard to
other
quantify
groups
that.
that we want to make sure that they provide more. I had sent you some time ago copies of two surveys that I had picked up from the APA meeting in Breckenridge, I
They were
believe.
very good, yes.
That's a woman and a company that's here in Colorado that's done surveys in the mountain towns, so in terms of a resource.
We will look at her as well. That's great.
Yeah, I'm just saying,
Yeah,
at least you have one.
Good. Okay.
I have one last statement.
Okay.
I'll shut up. We talked about this kind of planning 101. I'm hoping that you'll give it some thought so that we can talk about it at our next session, so that it just doesn't drift away.
And just to clarify, we're talking about 101 for ourselves, right? Just internal.
Just for ourselves.
This is not the
And
academy.
I don't know if that's done through a facilitator, something that, because obviously we want to just get the bare bones and see if we can kind of
Sure.
work our way through this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quickly.
Good idea.
Can I kind of summarize what I thought I heard everybody say that was going to be on the agenda? We're going to get subcommittee reports, which includes the surveys, the plan alternatives, the glossary, the overview of the process, and the stakeholders. And then are we going to review what we have for city council?
Yes, we sure will.
Yeah, that's
what-
preparation for joint planning commission, city council.
It's reviewing and kind of, just, again, getting ourselves ready for the next day, basically, the next evening. So just kind of organizing the structure, how we think we should present it. So, okay.
Do we need to, not next meeting, but maybe future meetings, talk about the web strategy and what we want to post on the web and how we want to just go about and do that so that we can get a jump start on the process?
And by the time we get to the next meeting, I will have had stuff posted too. Kathy Weaver's been creating a page for us and has ideas on how to do that, how to make it as interactive as possible too. We're also doing a video on Friday, just a 3-minute one to put on Channel 8 that we can also stream to talk about the comprehensive plan process for downtown, for the central area, why we're doing it and what it will do for us. So 3 minutes can be a quick blip. But,
Dennis, do we have just a gut feeling? The survey format and the website input or feedback format are going to be similar, but I would assume that the website format can be a little lengthier than the survey would be.
It's lengthier, and I don't think what we heard about the website stuff. It's a very different purpose. I think it's kind of an ongoing feedback. So as we put documents on, if we put the draft plan on, for example, people can start to comment on it. So I think it's more that ongoing participation. is the way I'm anticipating anyway.
So we can start collecting information, all that, so we all see, what's involved in that and get ourselves oriented a little bit.
That's right,
Know
exactly.
what's ahead of us.
So we start to get,
Then one of the things we could do, since it looks like we will have at least some of the subcommittees continue, then I will at the very least make sure, and if Julio wants to help on that, but talk more about how the outreach can take place through the web and through electronic means. I mean, that's an area that I have a fair amount of experience, and I'll definitely make a point of talking with Kathy
Good.
and making sure that I understand better the capabilities that we've got and her limitations and everything.
So in general, the expectation for the subcommittee reports is not the introductory long remarks, but we're going to really start focusing on the ways and means.
right, more details. All right. Should I see if Historic Preservation Board is still here and go out in the hall and just meet them out there? Would that be
All in
good
favor
for them?
of adjourning so that we can go and move outside?
Aye.
Motion to adjourn is always in order. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
I'll go check.